Now, across Texas, the issue is...
I'm Greg Grugan in Houston.
I'm Stephen Dial in Dallas, and this is Texas, the issue is.
Allowing public education dollars to follow the child. Governor Greg Abbott believes it should be permanent policy in the Lone Star State. This legislative session, Abbott has expended loads of political capital trying to push school choice through. And despite serious headwinds in the Texas House, the governor appears to be doubling down.
When it comes to education, mom and dad are in charge.
5 days after his school choice proposal was gunned down by the Texas House in a budgetary test vote, Governor Greg Abbott drew a line in the sand for lawmakers in the lower chamber.
One size does not fit all. No one in government knows better than mom and dad about which education option is the best for their child. That is what we will deliver this session by empowering parents with the power and freedom to choose the education best for their child.
In his third term, after walloping a well-known, well-funded Democratic challenger by double digits, Abbott, unlike past sessions, appears unwilling to buckle to legislative progressives and rural Republicans who fear vouchers will dilute funding for public schools.
Some people say, well, school choice is going to defund our public schools. Nothing could be further from the truth. That's just factually incorrect. Per student funding for public schools is at an all-time high. In this session, we're going to add even more money for public education as well as for teacher pay raises. The issue about whether or not schools are fully funded is answered. We are funding schools more fully today than ever before, and we will fund them even more at the end of this session. But one thing anybody in business understands, spending more money does not always lead to better results.
Analysts have linked Abbott's pledge to force vouchers through to his potential presidential aspirations and a desire to match school choice measures adopted in Florida and other red states.
If you look at what's happened in other states, Florida, for example, 20 years ago, in 2002, Florida embarked upon school choice in their state. And at that time, students who were coming from low-income families tested on these national tests as one of the worst in the country. Now, 20 years later, they test among the top of the best in the country. What school choice does is it ensures a competition in the education place. And public schools in Florida are doing better. Private schools in Florida are doing better. And homeschooling in Florida is doing better. Across the board, education is better. It's a component of multiple aspects to improve education.
With a majority of Texans consistently backing choice in statewide polls, sources tell Texas the issue is, Abbott stands willing to wield a veto pen or convene special sessions to push the measure through a reluctant lower chamber. And he will have the full backing of Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, leader of the Texas Senate.
This is the future of Texas, the future of America, to educate our kids.
Okay, Stephen, give me your one-word reaction.
I'm not going to pull a Rudy. My one word is unwavering.
Okay, there you have it. We are going to talk a great deal more about the governor's crusade for school choice when Texas the Issue Is returns on the other side of this break. Welcome back as we unpack Governor Greg Abbott's bid to push school voucher legislation through a reluctant Texas House and onto his desk for signature. Joining Stephen and I this week, highly regarded Rice University political analyst Mark Jones. Mark, you heard the governor. He told Texas business leaders in pretty clear terms, choice will happen. Is that stump rhetoric or a serious line in the sand?
Well, it's definitely not just stump rhetoric. I don't know if it's a firm line in the sand, but it's much closer to that. I think the governor is serious this session about making a full out effort to get school choice, at least in some form, and is willing to use his veto pen and block things or call a special session and even threaten to pass legislation that Democrats wouldn't want to see passed during a special session on that special session agenda.
Stephen, last week when the Texas House passed a bipartisan budget amendment essentially banning public dollars for vouchers, some were saying school choice was done. But apparently Governor Abbott is rejecting that message.
Yeah, Governor Abbott's not going to let this go. And I mean, he's using a lot of political capital every week. Since announcing this push, since our interview with Governor Greg Abbott, he's been going to city after city, and he's not going to stop. He's not going to back down. And so what it looks like is we could be gearing up for a special session. Now, the House sent a strong message, and I don't think there's going to be enough arm twisting to just overturn that overnight. In the House Education Committee this week, they were talking about different aspects of it, and I think Governor Abbott is using the word choice. I don't think Democrats and rural Republicans are against choice, but they're against using public funds for it.
Mark Jones, you heard the governor's reference to school choice success in Florida. How much does his national profile and potential presidential aspirations factor into the governor's crusade?
Well, I think it's more about his national profile and his standing among Texas Republicans than a presidential bid. I don't see Greg Abbott running for president. But that said, I think it's getting tougher and tougher for the governor in the largest red state in the country to explain to Republican activists and Republican lawmakers and Republican supporters why Texas is so far behind school choice in places like Arizona and Florida. That 20 years ago or so, we were in the same place, but Republicans are upset that they've moved ahead where they effectively have school choice for all, whereas Texas has no school choice.
Stephen, during the Senate debate on this issue, we learned that this initial choice program would have funding for roughly 62,000 kids in a state with more than 5 million public school students. That's a pretty modest percentage, and yet opponents are warning of the destruction of public ed as we know it. Does the rhetoric match the reality here?
I don't think it matches the numbers, but the rhetoric is what people are going to hear the most and see the most, and that could be the reason why the vote goes the way that it goes. Now, while it will only impact a small number of students, some public school advocates will say any public dollars that leave public schools at a time where inflation is high and doesn't appear to be going down at a sharp enough rate is going to impact public schools. Governor Abbott says that public schools will not lose money. Well, it depends on what figures you're looking at. What he's talking about is public schools are funded by attendance, especially for the large districts like Dallas ISD. But public school advocates are going to say if they lose one student, that's losing funds.
All right, Mark, your polling shows a majority of Texans are siding with the governor on school choice. Do you think that will factor into how hard and long he's willing to fight?
Well, I think that's definitely the case. Not only does the governor see the majority support for vouchers or educational savings plans when they're limited and focused as in the current legislation, but he also has the polls that we have that show that rural Texas Republicans, the people who vote in the Republican Party primaries, they support school choice mostly for ideological and philosophical reasons, and he's trying to use their support for it to balance against the support of local school intendants and superintendents and local teachers who are lobbying those rural state representatives on the Republican side to oppose school choice. So he's trying to mobilize those Republican partisans that he knows from the polls support school choice.
Stephen, given Abbott's party controls the Texas House, can the governor lose this fight without major damage to his stature?
Well, the news cycle is short, right? And so we forget things very quickly, at least the viewing public does. If he loses this fight, will it look bad from a national perspective as far as a Republican governor? Sure, but then he can easily just bounce back to beating President Biden over the border, fentanyl, and looking at real issues like people dying from fentanyl. He can use that politically to his advantage, even though it's an unfortunate topic.
Okay, let's leave it there. To see this interview and others, go to our Fox Station's YouTube pages and continue the conversation with us on social media.
Things continue to heat up in the Texas legislature, so join us next Sunday for another edition of Texas The Issue Is, and be sure to let us know what you think the issue is.